Hey, welcome to CineMike. For this episode, I'm going to go over my top 15 best Game of Thrones moments. I figured that with Season 7 starting up, and all the anticipation that comes with that now would be a good time to look back over some of the highlights. This is a show that has garnered fans that are as devoted to it as some are to religion. Many people plan their entire schedules around making time to watch the next episode. Game of Thrones is part political thriller, part war drama, and part fantasy adventure. It breaks all of the rules and has built a reputation for shocking its viewers, often dispatching beloved characters without any warning or indication. You have to have really thick skin to be a fan of the series. As long as you can hold out through some of the shocking moments, then you'll be in for one of the greatest shows of all time. With its amazing cast of actors that have crafted some of the greatest characters in television history, and with its amazing scope and scale that would fool you into thinking that you were watching a big budget film series. And also with its innovative creativity and surprising storytelling, this series has earned its acclaim and religious-like status. A show this good is really hard to narrow down to only 15 moments. Some sacrifices had to be made, and I cheat slightly by combining certain moments that feel like they're part of the same narrative thread. If your favorite moment doesn't make it into my top 15, then stick around because you might see it in my honorable mention section that I will briefly cover afterwards. Now before I begin, be warned. My list will include some major spoilers. Coming in number 15, Tyrion kills Tywin. I feel a little conflicted about putting this on the bottom of my list, because the moment itself is actually quite satisfying. To see Tyrion, my favorite character by the way, pushed to the edge and feeling all that history between him and his father in their final moments weighing heavy. All those years of abuse and psychological games, and then having it all end with Tyrion shooting an arrow into Tywin while he's on the crapper. That moment was solid. The problem was that the build-up to it felt a bit forced for me. I'm going to be honest, I'm not really a fan of how they resolved the romance story between Tyrion and Shae. They did not make her betrayal at all convincing for me. There was zero indication that she could turn that vengeful against him. In fact, she was portrayed as someone with a kind heart and as a woman with the courage to fight for what she believes in. I found it very hard to believe that an intelligent woman like her would be so totally oblivious to Tyrion sending her away to protect her, and then for her to be cruel enough to lie during his trial to secure his guilty verdict, and then to sleep with his father? It's all so melodramatic and way out of character for how she was presented up to that point. I found that setup a bit annoying, but I do have to admit that it did lead up to a moment that I really enjoyed, and it gave Peter Dinklage some really powerful opportunities to show off what an amazing actor he is. In number 14, The Fall of Stannis. I think it's hard to argue that anything haunted viewers the way that Shireen screams did as she was burned alive. The young innocent girl was sacrificed to a horrible death by her own father, Stannis. I don't think anyone can say that this moment in itself is good, but it is the cause of some interesting drama, including his wife's suicide. Stannis is a tragic character, much like Captain Ahab from Moby Dick. His ambitions in the end doom everything he cares for. He dies alone, realizing that the horrors that he's committed have all been for nothing. I wish that we got to see a little more of the battle that led to his defeat, but it was the end result that puts this on my list. Plus, it does also give Brienne of Tarth some nice closure in avenging the death of Renly Baratheon. Coming in number 13, Hold the Door. The backstory for Hodor that I never knew that I wanted. I hate to admit it, but I never put a lot of thought into the big guy, aside from him being Bran's means of getting around. Little did I know that he had such a sad origin story. One of the best developments has been the show revealing more of Bran's abilities. With training from the Three-Eyed Raven, Bran now has the ability to see into the past and even to have influence over it. The possibilities this presents is exciting. Now we can see more of the backstory for this world, and also how Bran potentially influenced it all, which we get an example of with Hodor. We see Bran unintentionally transfer the urgency of a present attack by White Walkers into the mind of Hodor as a child. The time jumping and connecting the events as Hodor fulfills his destiny to hold the door and the White Walkers back while Bran makes his escape is effective and heartbreaking. In number 12, The Battle of Blackwater. Earlier in the show we always hear of battles but never actually get to see them. Maybe this was due to budget constraints, but whatever the case may be, it was always a little disappointing for me. Well, that changes near the end of Season 2, with Stannis' attack against Blackwater Bay in King's Landing. Tyrion scheming and strategizing is always a highlight of the show, and in this case he's been tasked with preparing the defense of King's Landing. We knew that he had a plan for the large stockpile of wildfire that he gains possession of, but I don't think any of us were prepared for this awesome moment. In number 11, the birth of the dragons. Daenerys Targaryen took a while at the start to really get her story rolling. The earliest indication of the strength that she would gain over time was during her husband Khal Drogo's funeral. As his body burned, she stepped into the flames with her dragon eggs, and seemingly to her death. But then when the flames died down, to the awe of all that was present, she remained in the ashes, with 3 hatched dragons in her arms. A great moment that truly started to bring in the fantasy elements of the show. Emilia Clarke has done a great job of showing the transition from an oppressed victim to the kick-ass dragon-riding queen that we know her as today. In number 10, Arya kills Walder Frey. This is a moment that fans had long been anticipating, and in more ways than one too. On the Arya side of things, we've spent a long time building up her skills to become an assassin. In fact, I'd argue almost too much time. There were moments in her storyline where it felt like they were getting a little lost with filler. Then, on the Frey side of things, it's been a good long while since the Red Wedding, the most shocking and upsetting moment in the show's history. And that Frey piece of trash had gone all this time with no consequences for that terrible betrayal to the Starks. Well, the payoff for both of these things came in this moment. Disguised as a servant girl, Arya serves Walder Frey a very special pie. She reveals that the pie was made up with the carved up bits of his sons, and then she reveals herself. In his final moments, Frey feels the horror that her mother Catelyn Stark must have felt. Vengeance never tasted so sweet. In number 9, Jon Snow's origins. We have waited since the beginning of the show to find out who Jon's mother was. His father, Ned Stark, promised to explain, but then the truth appeared to die with him. Fortunately, Bran's abilities of seeing into the past has granted the story opportunities to flesh out some backstory and provide the answer. The show has made it clear, especially after Jon's resurrection from the dead, that he is to be a major player in the events that will unfold in Westeros. Well, this revelation takes things to a whole new level. Jon Snow's mother was in fact Ned Stark's sister, Lyanna, and his true father was Rhaegar Targaryen, who'd abducted her and started a war. Knowing that Jon's life was in danger, Ned concocted a cover story that he had a bastard son while away from home in this conflict. This is a huge moment. Not only does it add another layer to Ned that makes us all love and respect him even more, but this also means that Jon is even more important than we thought. In many ways, Daenerys and Jon have been running parallel to each other. Both had to rise up and embrace hidden strengths, and both have become almost religious figures in their world. So it makes sense that they are related. The Targaryen bloodline is obviously a powerful one, and now we are all anticipating the possibility that we may yet see Jon adopt a dragon of his own. In number 8, the death of Ned Stark. This is one of those moments that you hate to watch, but you also have to appreciate. It's a risk to kill off the character that fans were following throughout most of Season 1. Also to have him killed off in such a terrible way where he's first humiliated and then dishonored. In a more conventional story, he would have stayed the main character, but this show was establishing early on that it's going to toy with your expectations. Sean Bean did a fantastic job in the role, and it was painful to see him go out like that. But it does certainly fuel conflict and make the audience invest in wanting to see his honor restored. In number 7, the Purple Wedding. I think it's a fair argument to say that Joffrey could be the most hated character of all time. His actions were horrific, but he was also a spoiled brat about it all. So many times we wanted to see him fail, and yet he kept ending up with what he wanted. When he broke his word to spare Ned Stark's life and beheaded him, he became public enemy number 1 for the fans. However, he seemed untouchable until his wedding to Margaery Tyrell. Just as he felt on top of the world, once again humiliating his uncle Tyrion in front of everyone, karma finally caught up with him. You wanted to see him suffer. I also was surprised to see him killed off so soon. Again, this broke from expectations as it felt like he was being played up to be a major villain in the grander scheme. However, it was still very satisfying to see him get what he deserved. In number 6, the Battle of Castle Black. Nearing the end of Season 4, Jon Snow felt like a character that was not living up to his full potential. He had the underdog backstory, being the bastard son that had to stand in the shadow of his legitimate siblings, and you wanted to root for him. This is where Jon Snow showed himself to be the badass that I wanted to see. He kicked ass and led his men in a victory against all odds. The battle was as epic as a big-budget movie. My favorite moment is where the Night's Watch unleashes the Ice Scythe, this pendulum of death that was buried into the ice of the wall. Such a great moment when it swoops across the wall and totally obliterates the wildlings that were climbing it. This is also the sad conclusion to the love-hate affair between Jon Snow and Ygritte as she dies in his arms at the end of the fight. In number 5, Cersei blows up King's Landing. The use of wildfire makes it twice on this list, and both times it was used really well. This is the moment that Cersei totally falls into darkness, when her last threads to humanity is severed. The one thing that has always mattered to her was her children. She would do any terrible deed necessary to protect them. Through the series, one by one, death has taken them from her. Now one child is all that is left, King Tommen. In this moment, her actions weren't about protecting him. She lashed out for revenge because of the pain and humiliation she endured from the High Sparrow. And to get her revenge, she didn't care about the innocents that would die as collateral damage. She didn't care that Queen Marjorie was present and what her death would do to her son King Tommen. In the end, her act of selfishness killed her son as he took his own life at the sight of the Great Sept engulfed in a massive wildfire explosion. Now she finds herself sitting on the Iron Throne, embracing the monster that she has become. Her biggest supporter, her brother and lover Jaime, even seems afraid of her. In number 4, Daenerys burns the cows. Every now and then the show feels like it needs to remind us what a badass Daenerys is. And this is an awesome moment where she shows her strength and resolve. She can be merciful, but no one should ever mistake that for weakness. She's getting better at playing this game every day. The Dothraki cows had no idea what an incredible mistake it was to imprison her, and rather than submit, she saw this as an opportunity. In one swift move, she burns the cows and then steps through the fire and over their ashes while the Dothrakis kneel at her feet, ready to serve her in the war to come. A great moment. In number 3, the Red Wedding. This is an event that has become as infamous in the entertainment world as Pearl Harbor is in history. A tragic end for Robb Stark, the King of the North, that sent fans into complete shock and disbelief, as though a loved one had died. That's because the on-screen tragedy was especially horrific and violent. It's very difficult to admit that this was a good moment because it was so very disturbing to watch. In fact, I'd say that my initial reaction was very negative towards it. However, I can't deny that this marked a huge turning point. In a traditional story, Robb Stark fit the archetype of the hero who's destined to avenge his family and take down the villains. The Red Wedding was the moment when George R.R. Martin showed us that we can't trust anything to be safe or sacred, that this story was going to play with expectations and take risks. It's one of the reasons why it's so damn addictive. This is easily the most shocking moment in the series, but I wouldn't label it as the best for me. In number 2, Jon Snow's death and resurrection. Once again they managed to pull the rug from under us. When Jon Snow met his end through the betrayal of his brothers of the Night's Watch, the fans practically broke the internet with their disbelief. How could they kill off this beloved character, especially when his story had so many places left to go? Haven't we suffered enough? Well, the Lord of Light heard your prayers, and through the Red Woman, Jon Snow lives again. The cries over his death paled in comparison to the cries of joy for his return. This delivered fans of the character the ultimate payoff. Jon Snow is too important to die. At least at this point. And this brings me to my first place spot, which I'm actually going to award to a series of moments because I love everything in this episode equally. In number 1, Battle of the Bastards. If Joffrey was the most hated character, then I think it's reasonable to say that Ramsay is the most feared. While Joffrey's evils can be attributed to him being a spoiled brat, Ramsay's is because he is a psychopathic serial killer. We saw him strip Theon down to his soul, crushing his humanity in some of the most horrific scenes that I've ever seen. We saw him feed a fleeing girl to his dogs just for sport, and we saw him transform Winterfell into the gates of hell. So when Jon Snow rode in with his army of wildlings to avenge his family and reclaim the land from Ramsay, this confrontation became possibly the most anticipated in the entire series. And it did not disappoint. As Jon Snow and his army tried to hold their ground against overwhelming odds, as waves of men got taken down, the bodies began to pile up over top of each other, forcing the living to climb over the dead. The visuals of war and violence here makes the ones in Saving Private Ryan look tamed. I would put this up there as possibly the most impressive battle that I've ever seen in anything. Also seeing Ramsay's reign of terror finally come to an end with his defeat was very satisfying. Honestly, I'll miss Ramsay in a way because I think he was the best villain that this show has to offer. Really good performance. This show has been giving Jon Snow some really great moments recently. He started off as a bastard and an outsider, but in this battle, he finally gets to kick some ass, and it's rewarding to see him truly rise to become the King of the North. And that is my top 15 best moments from Game of Thrones. Trying to pick out only 15 moments from a show that has great ones in every episode was pretty tough. I mean, it's memorable every time that the Hound opens his mouth. So for the sake of giving more credit, here are 3 more honorable mentions. Cersei's Walk of Shame. Part of me is satisfied to see Cersei get even a fraction of the pain that she's caused to others, but it was also hard not to sympathize with the extreme humiliation of this moment. Jaime Lannister's confession. Most of the moments that stand out for fans are the shocking ones, so it can be easy to overlook little moments like this. At his lowest point, Jaime reflects on his decision to kill the Mad King and reveals to Brienne and to the fans that he was not motivated by greed or self-preservation, but instead by the need to protect King's Landing and all of Westeros from a dangerous man. One of the things that this show excels at is constantly changing our opinions of characters. Some of them start off good and become bad, and also vice versa. Theon is another great example of this. Speaking of which, I'm going to give my last mention to Theon's rescue of Sansa Stark. After Theon's betrayal against the Starks, we wanted to see him pay for it, but we were not prepared for the incredible brutality that he would go through after being captured by Ramsay. By the time that Sansa also ended up at the mercy of Ramsay, we wanted Theon to get a second chance. It was a good moment to see Theon finally grab hold of whatever remained of his soul and rescue her. And that is about all of the moments that I can squeeze into just this one video. Season 7 of Game of Thrones is back on Sunday nights on HBO, and it's sure to offer up a whole new list of great moments to choose from. Winter is here. So in closing, click like if you enjoyed this video, and please feel free to list your own favorite moments in the comments below. Tell me if you agree or disagree, and I also welcome you to subscribe to my channel. So until next time, this is Mike, signing off.